What happens when an undercover CEO discovers the harsh truth about his own movie theater? Hello, incredible viewers. Welcome back to our channel where we share powerful stories of leadership, transformation, and redemption. Today, we're diving into the riveting journey of Victor Hayes, the CEO of the Grand Screen, a renowned movie theater chain celebrated for its luxurious cinematic experience. Disguised as a part-time usher, Victor uncovered shocking mistreatment, overwhelmed employees, and a toxic work environment that threatened everything he built. But instead of walking away, Victor fought to restore integrity and rebuild trust. Stay tuned. This story will leave you inspired. Victor Hayes sat in his corner office on the top floor of the Grand Screen Cinema's corporate headquarters, staring grimly at the latest employee turnover reports. The numbers weren't just bad, they were catastrophic. Complaints about rude staff, malfunctioning projectors, poorly maintained lobbies, and subpar service were piling up. Worse still, the flagship theater, the Grand Screen downtown, which had once been the crown jewel of his mother's empire, was now at the heart of the chaos. Victor had taken over the business after his mother's passing, determined to preserve her legacy and expand the company's reach. Under his leadership, the Grand Screen Cinema had grown from a handful of theaters to a chain of 11 premium locations renowned for their luxurious amenities and state-of-the-art facilities. Yet, despite his best efforts to keep the business profitable and innovative, something had gone terribly wrong. Over the past year, the complaints had only worsened, and reports from his district managers seemed increasingly hollow. They insisted the issues were merely temporary setbacks or the result of a few disgruntled employees. But Victor wasn't convinced. Numbers didn't lie, and the sheer volume of complaints and resignations couldn't be ignored. The theater's revenue was suffering, but even more troubling was the decline in employee morale. If the flagship location continued its downward spiral, the reputation of the entire company would be at risk. Frustration simmered beneath Victor's composed exterior. His attempts to address the problems through formal channels had gone nowhere, his directives seemingly falling on deaf ears. Marcus Taylor, the theater manager at the Grand Screen downtown, was particularly evasive, providing only vague reassurances and deflecting any responsibility. Determined to uncover the truth, Victor made a bold decision. If the official reports couldn't be trusted, then he needed to see the reality for himself. Disguising himself as Mike Collins, a new maintenance worker desperate for a job, he prepared to go undercover. With his hair dyed a dull brown, his beard trimmed and roughened, and glasses adding a subtle touch of anonymity, Victor looked nothing like the polished executive who frequented business conferences and magazine covers. He traded his tailored suits for worn-out jeans, a faded t-shirt, and steel-toed boots. It was a risky plan, but Victor was willing to do whatever it took to uncover the truth and restore the Grand Screen downtown to its former glory. Victor, now Mike Collins, arrived at the Grand Screen downtown early one Friday morning, the air crisp and cool as the city began to stir. The theater's facade, once gleaming with polished glass and bright neon signs, looked faded and unkempt. Posters promoting the latest blockbusters hung crookedly in the display cases, some with corners peeling away from the frame. The lobby, designed to impress guests with its sleek modern decor and lavish concessions counter, felt lifeless. Dim lighting and a faint musty odor hung in the air, doing little to evoke the luxurious experience the theater had once promised. As Victor stepped inside, he noticed the carpets were stained and frayed along the edges. Dust clung to the edges of the ceiling fixtures, and the concession stand's stainless steel surfaces were smeared with fingerprints and grease. Employees moved about with mechanical efficiency, their expressions weary and devoid of enthusiasm. A line of patrons stretched across the lobby, some tapping their feet impatiently, while others muttered complaints about slow service. Victor's gaze shifted to the cashiers, their shoulders hunched as they attempted to keep pace with the growing crowd. One young woman behind the counter looked on the verge of tears as she fumbled with the register, her hands shaking as she issued incorrect change to a customer, who responded with an irritated huff. The man who greeted him, Marcus Taylor, the theater manager, seemed rushed and distracted. Victor had expected Marcus to at least conduct a brief interview or ask for his credentials. Instead, Marcus glanced at Victor's application, barely acknowledging his presence before shoving a clipboard into his hands. "You're here for maintenance, right? Good. We're understaffed and things keep breaking down. Just do your job and stay out of everyone's way," Marcus snapped, his phone already pressed against his ear as he marched away. Victor followed Marcus on a hasty tour through the dimly lit corridors and cluttered storage rooms. Projectors hummed erratically, some flickering in and out of focus as employees muttered curses under their breath. Trash bins overflowed with discarded popcorn bags and soda cups, their sticky residues attracting flies. As Marcus continued to bark orders and ignore questions, Victor realized the situation was even worse than he'd feared. Whatever was destroying the grand screen downtown, it had already taken root deep within the theater's very foundation. Settling into his role as Mike Collins, the new maintenance worker, Victor began familiarizing himself with the daily routines at the grand screen downtown. It didn't take long for him to meet the staff members who struggled to keep the theater operational despite overwhelming obstacles. Rebecca, the young woman he had noticed struggling at the concessions counter, was just 18 and trying to save up for college. Her kindness toward customers was genuine, but Victor could see the fatigue in her eyes, the way her hands shook slightly when the lines grew too long, and Marcus's reprimands echoed across the lobby. Then there was Carl, the projectionist, a man in his late 50s who had been with the theater since it first opened. His deep, gravelly voice carried an air of resignation as he explained the outdated equipment he was expected to keep running. "They haven't upgraded anything in years," Carl grumbled one afternoon as Victor helped him replace a frayed power cord. "Projectors break down at least twice a day, and Marcus's solution? Tape it up and hope it holds." Victor also crossed paths with Maria, one of the janitorial staff who worked double shifts to keep the theater remotely clean. Her work ethic was commendable, but her frustration seeped through in her whispered complaints. "Marcus keeps cutting my hours," she told Victor one night as she scrubbed at a sticky stain in the main lobby. "But then he piles on more work. If I don't finish on time, he acts like I'm the problem." It was a pattern Victor saw throughout the theater. People stretched beyond their limits, performing tasks that should have been shared among more staff members. Dylan, a high school senior who worked part-time as an usher, admitted that he often stayed late without pay just to help Maria finish cleaning the theaters after particularly busy nights. "If I don't help her, it'll take her hours. And Marcus sure isn't going to pitch in," Dylan said, his expression a mixture of frustration and resignation. As Victor continued to interact with the staff, he noticed a common thread of fear and disillusionment. They were hard-working, dedicated people, but their spirits were slowly being crushed by a manager who saw them as tools rather than people. Victor's resolve to get to the bottom of the theater's problems only grew stronger with every conversation. As Victor continued working undercover at the grand screen downtown, the depth of the problems became increasingly clear. Conversations with the staff painted a grim picture of mismanagement, neglect, and an overwhelming lack of support. Rebecca, the concessions worker, confided in him during a rare quiet moment. "Marcus keeps pushing us to upsell everything. Popcorn, drinks, candy. Doesn't matter if the lines are backed up to the entrance," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "Only cares about numbers, not whether we're actually able to keep up or give people good service." Victor noticed the way Rebecca's enthusiasm for her job had dimmed, replaced by a resigned acceptance of the theater's deteriorating standards. It was the same story from Maria, who explained how Marcus continued to reduce her hours but expected her to cover the entire theater's cleaning workload alone. "I've told him 100 times that I can't keep up by myself," Maria muttered, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "He says I need to be more efficient, but there's only so much I can do in the time I'm given." Carl, the projectionist, had his own complaints about Marcus's negligence. "The projectors are old and temperamental. Half the time they overheat or the film gets stuck," he said, his fingers trembling slightly as he worked on splicing together a reel. "Marcus says he'll get them replaced, but that's been his line for years. Customers pay good money to watch these films, and sometimes they can't even get through a showing without technical issues." Victor could see the frustration etched into Carl's face, the way his hands shook from overwork and stress. But perhaps the most telling observation came from Dylan, the young usher, who had overheard Marcus threatening to fire another employee for missing a shift due to illness. "He acts like we're all replaceable," Dylan explained, his tone bitter. "If you're sick, you're weak. If you can't handle the workload, you're lazy. People leave because they're treated like they don't matter." Victor realized that Marcus's tyrannical management style was more than just harsh. It was actively driving employees away and degrading the theater's reputation. The toxic environment Marcus had created wasn't just about cutting corners or enforcing discipline, it was about maintaining control through fear and intimidation. Victor could see how the staff tiptoed around him, their conversations quickly silencing whenever Marcus's heavy footsteps approached. No one felt safe enough to speak up, and those who dared were quickly silenced through threats of reduced hours or outright dismissal. As Victor gathered these accounts, his anger grew. This wasn't a problem that could be fixed by tweaking schedules or issuing memos. It was a systemic issue rooted in abusive leadership, and Victor knew he would have to dig much deeper to find a lasting solution. As Victor continued his undercover role at the grand screen downtown, the signs of neglect and strain became increasingly evident. What had once been a luxurious, well-maintained cinema had decayed into a facility riddled with issues. Sticky floors in the lobby remained unaddressed for hours after rush periods, and the air conditioning frequently malfunctioned, leaving certain screening rooms uncomfortably hot while others were freezing. Victor watched as Maria struggled to clean the massive theater complex by herself, her movements hurried and her expression perpetually strained. Her efforts were diligent but inevitably insufficient. On multiple occasions, Victor helped her with mopping and trash disposal just to keep the place from descending into utter disarray. The work Maria was expected to accomplish single-handedly was clearly designed for at least a team of 2, if not 3. Yet Marcus continually slashed her hours, insisting that budget cuts were necessary despite the obvious decline in cleanliness and customer satisfaction. Rebecca was similarly overwhelmed, her station at the concessions counter often buried under piles of dirty trays and unstocked shelves. Victor noted how Rebecca's attempts to keep up with customer demands were repeatedly undermined by Marcus's incessant focus on upselling. "He wants me to push the premium packages even when the lines are out the door," Rebecca confided, her voice edged with exasperation. "We're losing customers because they're tired of waiting, but he doesn't care. He just wants those numbers to look good on paper." The pressure to generate revenue at all costs had created an atmosphere of stress and resentment. Even the simplest tasks, like restocking candy or refilling drink machines, became Herculean efforts due to a lack of manpower and faulty equipment that Marcus refused to replace. Carl's frustrations were equally palpable. The outdated projectors malfunctioned so frequently that Carl spent more time troubleshooting than actually running films. When Victor asked him about maintenance, Carl shook his head with a grimace. "Marcus thinks fixing them means slapping some tape on a busted wire and calling it good. It's embarrassing. People pay good money to watch a movie, and half the time they're dealing with skipped frames or garbled sound." Carl's tone was resigned, his passion for his craft long eroded by the constant battle against inadequate resources and unresponsive management. Victor also noticed how Dylan, the usher, was repeatedly pulled away from his regular duties to cover for Marcus's mistakes. When Marcus failed to update the schedules correctly, Dylan was left scrambling to manage crowd control during peak hours with no guidance or support. The stress was evident in Dylan's weary expression and slouched posture, his usually upbeat personality dulled by the relentless pressure. Everywhere Victor looked, he saw employees stretched beyond their limits, their enthusiasm replaced by a sense of survival. It was clear that Marcus's neglect was driving the theater to the brink of collapse, and Victor's determination to change things only grew stronger. The deeper Victor delved into the inner workings of the grand screen downtown, the more disturbing the reality became. Marcus's leadership was not just ineffective, it was actively harming the employees and the theater's reputation. The constant focus on profit margins and sales targets had created a culture where employee well-being was treated as an afterthought, if it was considered at all. Marcus's disdain for the workers was evident in every interaction. He barked orders rather than offering guidance, blamed others for his own mistakes, and consistently cut hours to save costs. Despite customer complaints about filthy auditoriums and malfunctioning projectors, Marcus's response was always the same: "We don't have the budget for that." But Victor had seen the revenue reports. The theater was still profitable, even if the margins weren't as high as Marcus demanded. The real issue was Marcus's obsession with squeezing every last cent of profit from the operation, regardless of the toll it took on his employees. Victor witnessed how Marcus's negligence impacted each staff member personally. Rebecca's exhaustion led to frequent errors at the concessions counter, which Marcus used as an excuse to berate her publicly. Maria's health was deteriorating under the strain of trying to keep the sprawling facility clean with inadequate resources. Carl's passion for his job was nearly extinguished by the frustration of battling broken equipment with makeshift repairs. And Dylan, once enthusiastic and friendly, now appeared defeated, his jokes and lightheartedness replaced by a weariness that clung to him like a shadow. It was clear to Victor that Marcus's toxic management style was not just driving customers away, it was breaking the very people who kept the theater running. The worst realization came when Victor discovered that Marcus actively discouraged employees from reporting issues to upper management. During a lunch break, Rebecca confided in him about how her previous attempts to contact HR regarding her excessive workload had resulted in her shifts being cut. Marcus made it clear that if we complain, we're expendable, she said bitterly. He'll just bring in someone else who's desperate for a paycheck. The fear of retaliation kept everyone in line, trapped in a cycle of overwork and exploitation. Victor's frustration deepened with each passing day, his determination to confront Marcus solidifying into an unyielding resolve. The harsh reality was undeniable. Marcus was not just neglecting his responsibilities, he was abusing his power, and Victor was prepared to do whatever it took to make things right. Victor had seen enough. The ongoing mistreatment of employees, the neglect of essential maintenance, and the blatant disregard for their well-being were symptoms of a toxic leadership style that could no longer be ignored. Determined to confront the source of the problem, Victor decided it was time to face Marcus directly. It was a busy Friday evening, and the lobby of the grand screen downtown buzzed with the chatter of customers eagerly waiting to catch the latest blockbuster. Popcorn machines whirred, ticket scanners beeped, and the rush of footsteps echoed through the hall. Amid the chaos, Victor found Marcus in his cramped office, hunched over spreadsheets, muttering about sales projections. Taking a deep breath, Victor knocked on the open door. Marcus barely looked up, his eyes fixed on his laptop screen. "What is it, Rick? Can't you see I'm busy?" Marcus snapped, his voice sharp and impatient. Victor stepped inside, his posture rigid, his tone calm but firm. "We need to talk. Now." The urgency in Victor's voice must have registered, because Marcus finally looked up. A scowl etched across his face. "About what?" "If it's another complaint from Rebecca or Carl, save it. They need to toughen up or find work somewhere else." Victor's jaw tightened. "That's exactly the problem, Marcus. You're running this place like a sweatshop, and it's hurting everyone, employees and customers alike." Marcus laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You think you know how to run this theater better than me? You've been here, what, a few weeks? You have no idea what it takes to keep this place profitable." Victor met his gaze, unwavering. "I know enough to see that your leadership style is built on intimidation and exploitation. You push people to their limits, cut their hours, deny them the support they need, and then blame them when things fall apart. That's not management, Marcus." The color drained from Marcus's face, but he quickly recovered, his eyes narrowed into slits. "If you don't like it here, there's the door. Nobody's forcing you to stay." Victor stepped forward, his voice lowering but losing none of its intensity. "You don't get it, do you? I'm not just another employee. My name isn't Rick Matthews. My name is Victor Grant, and I own the grand screen." Marcus's expression twisted from arrogance to outright shock, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to process what he'd just heard. No way." "You're lying." Victor shook his head. "No, Marcus. The only lie here has been your version of leadership. I went undercover because I needed to see what was really happening, and what I've seen is beyond unacceptable. Effective immediately, you're relieved of your duties." Marcus's shoulders slumped, his bravado crumbling as the realization of his downfall settled in. For the first time he looked vulnerable, his power stripped away by the very man he had so carelessly dismissed. Victor turned away, his words ringing with finality. "It's time to clean up the mess you've made, starting now." Victor's confrontation with Marcus was only the beginning. Despite removing the toxic manager from his position, the damage Marcus had inflicted upon the grand screen downtown was deep and widespread. The days following Marcus's termination were filled with confusion, resentment, and apprehension. Many employees were still skeptical of Victor's motives, unsure whether his bold action was merely a publicity stunt or a genuine effort to improve their working conditions. Rebecca avoided eye contact, her usual kindness replaced by a guarded wariness. Carl worked in silence, his shoulders perpetually hunched, as if bracing for yet another scolding. Victor threw himself into the day-to-day operations, working alongside the employees he had come to know and respect. He repaired broken projectors, helped clean up the concession stands, and took tickets when the lines grew long. But even his presence on the floor wasn't enough to dispel the lingering shadow of Marcus's oppressive management. The stress and bitterness that had accumulated over months of mistreatment couldn't be washed away overnight. Despite Victor's attempts to encourage dialogue and foster a sense of unity, the wounds were still fresh, the scars too deep. The breaking point came when Carl collapsed during a particularly chaotic evening shift. Overwhelmed by the pressure of being short-staffed and overworked, his body simply gave out. Victor was the one who found him, pale and gasping for breath in the hallway outside the main theater. As Carl was rushed to the hospital, Victor's anger boiled over. This was no longer just about bad leadership, it was about people's health, safety, and well-being. Watching Carl being wheeled away on a stretcher crystallized Victor's resolve. His company had failed its workers, and it was his responsibility to fix it. The time for observation was over. It was time to take decisive, lasting action. Victor arrived at the grand screen downtown early the next morning, his determination sharpened into a cutting edge. The previous night's chaos, punctuated by Carl's collapse, had made something clear. Waiting to implement change was no longer an option. As employees trickled in for their shifts, Victor made his way to the break room, a place where Marcus had often berated and intimidated the staff. Instead, Victor called a meeting, his tone firm but encouraging. He stood before the gathered employees, his gaze steady as he spoke. "I haven't been honest with you," he began, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the murmurs. "My name isn't James Porter, my real name is Victor Hale, and I'm the owner of the Grand Screen Theaters." A collective gasp swept through the room, disbelief and shock etched on their faces. Rebecca's eyes widened, her hand hovering over her mouth. Carl, who had returned despite his health scare, stared at Victor with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. Even Jason, the exhausted projectionist who had spent years working under Marcus's oppressive rule, seemed taken aback. Victor pressed on, his voice unwavering. "I went undercover because I needed to see for myself what was really happening here, and what I've discovered is unacceptable." He admitted that while he had been receiving reports of discontent and turnover for months, he had allowed himself to be swayed by Marcus's false assurances. "I made the mistake of trusting someone who was more interested in power than people," Victor confessed. "And that ends now." He met each employee's gaze, his sincerity undeniable. "Marcus has been fired, effective immediately, but removing him is only the beginning." Victor outlined his plan with urgency and clarity. The oppressive management style that Marcus had enforced would be replaced with a more compassionate and responsive approach. Effective immediately, Rebecca was promoted to assistant manager, a role she had essentially been performing without recognition or authority. Her dedication to her work and her colleagues had not gone unnoticed by Victor. "You've been the glue holding this place together," Victor acknowledged, his voice earnest. "It's time you were treated as such." He also introduced a new initiative, anonymous feedback forms and weekly meetings where employees could openly discuss concerns and suggest improvements without fear of retaliation. Victor promised to address issues promptly, to listen and act rather than dismiss their experiences. Additionally, he committed to reviewing schedules, ensuring fair workloads, and providing proper breaks and training. The grand screen downtown was meant to be a place where people enjoyed their work and took pride in what they did, Victor said, his voice firm. "We're going to make it that place again." His declaration hung in the air, heavy with hope and skepticism. But as Victor looked around the room, he could see the faintest flicker of belief returning to their eyes, and for the first time, the atmosphere felt just a little bit lighter. Rebuilding trust was Victor's top priority, and he approached it with unwavering dedication. Instead of retreating to his luxurious office miles away, Victor chose to work daily at the grand screen downtown, blending in with the employees, and proving his commitment through action. He shadowed Rebecca, helping with customer service at the ticket counter, sweeping popcorn-strewn aisles, and even assisting Jason in the projection room when the equipment malfunctioned. His presence was consistent, not just a temporary gesture of goodwill. Weekly meetings became a cornerstone of his efforts, offering a safe space for employees to voice their concerns, frustrations, and ideas. Victor listened intently, never dismissing their grievances or deflecting blame. When Carl brought up the lack of proper breaks and the outdated equipment causing strain on staff, Victor responded by immediately implementing structured breaks and ordering updated projectors and cleaning supplies. Rebecca, thriving in her new managerial role, coordinated with Victor to ensure everyone's workload was manageable and schedules were posted well in advance. Gradually, the tension that had once poisoned the theater's atmosphere began to dissipate. Employees who had once worked in fear of Marcus's wrath started to relax, their guarded expressions softening with each passing day. Victor's authenticity and commitment to real change slowly earned their respect. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight, but as days turned into weeks, Victor's dedication proved genuine. By showing humility, consistency, and respect, Victor was mending what Marcus had broken. The grand screen downtown was beginning to feel like a team again, one Victor was determined to strengthen and support. Over the following months, Victor's dedication to rebuilding the grand screen downtown resulted in lasting changes that revitalized both the staff and the theater's reputation. Rebecca flourished in her managerial role, implementing fair schedules, organizing proper training sessions, and establishing a mentorship program where experienced employees like Carl helped newcomers adapt. This sense of guidance and collaboration not only improved employee morale, but also enhanced overall productivity. Victor invested heavily in updating outdated equipment, ensuring projection rooms ran smoothly, and reducing stress on the technical team. He also introduced a rewards program recognizing exceptional service, providing bonuses and incentives for hard work and creativity. Customer satisfaction soared as employees felt valued and supported, their enthusiasm reflected in the quality of service they provided. Victor made it a point to visit the theater regularly, engaging with employees and ensuring the open communication channels he established remained active. Anonymous feedback forms became a staple, allowing staff to voice concerns without fear of retaliation. The theater's revenues climbed steadily, bolstered by the improved work environment and the resulting positive word of mouth. Victor's willingness to listen, adapt, and implement real changes turned the grand screen downtown from a fractured, toxic workplace into a thriving, welcoming environment where creativity and dedication were genuinely appreciated. It was a transformation built on trust, fairness, and genuine leadership. The story of Victor's transformation of the grand screen downtown highlights the importance of compassionate leadership and accountability. By going undercover, Victor learned that genuine success stems from valuing employees, listening to their concerns, and taking meaningful action. His willingness to address issues head-on and implement positive changes demonstrated that empathy and collaboration are essential for building a thriving, motivated workforce. Victor's journey proves that true leadership requires continuous engagement, transparency, and fostering an environment where everyone feels valued and empowered. Ultimately, a company's strength lies in the well-being and dedication of its people.